2 timber framed windows into our shed model. In order to do that, we'll again drag in a file which helps to explain how that detail works. This is PDF, which means it's a vector, so we can explode it. So this is a trend window because they're the ones that could actually provide me with the detail in order to be able to explain this. But I'm using a steg bar sized window, and so we'll talk about that in a second. So before we go any further, I want to explode this. So I'll select it, explode into current view, get rid of the original. This is the view of the window in section. So that's the sill, the bottom, the head, the top, and the jamb being the sides. So this is a clearer representation of what we need right now for the plan. Now, in order to be able to explain this, I'm going to use a fill, make it a bit darker. I could make it 25%. The other thing I could do is make it timber. So I'll go to this timber detail, black foreground, light brown background, and not too thick, so just number 2 or number 3. And then I can do a couple of different things. So I could just magic wand straight into here, magic wand, magic wand, magic wand. That didn't work. Let's try that again. I might need to do this one a little bit more manually. Let me just see which method I'm using. Let's change to polygonal method. All right, and we'll fix these little filleted corners. Oh, that one was a bit nasty. Let's fix that one up first. Great. So this is all the timber components. So that's one side. And then, of course, we've got a bead on the outside. It's still not working really well. There's obviously a slight error with the way it's been drawn, so it's not showing up exactly. Yeah, I can see from here where the problem is. So we'll just snap that one, and we can see that's imperfect there, which is why it wasn't working properly. Just basically leave that one alone. Okay, so once we're happy with that, we can select, and group. Now I didn't resize them. I should have obviously done that before I started. Let's group these together. Let's just check to see if that dimension is correct, and if it's not, we can resize it. 138, so nope, we're about twice as big as we need to be. So edit, make sure this is suspended, edit, reshape, resize, define graphically, and so I want from here to here to be 138. All right, great. So I've got my timber. There's some little seals here that I could copy in as well if I cared to. And so we can get another type of fill. So I could just use my solid fill in this case, just to explain this little gasket. It's not really detailed. I can again see a little hole, which is why that wasn't working. We don't need to go to this level of detail. It's important to understand because I'm just trying to represent a manufactured item. But just because I'm wanting to explain this to you and I'm wanting you to be able to understand it, I'm just going to a little bit extra detail than necessary. So the drawing looks really nice and it's clear what we're trying to communicate. Okay, so that's it. We'll do one more here for a glass. I'll change this to our glass. And I'll make the background of that a nice light blue. In this case, we can see this is only single glazing. Now, there's almost no circumstance where I actually would use single glazing. Because this is a shed, it definitely doesn't make sense to double glaze it. All right, so let's move that away. And we'll move this over here for now. And of course, the point is this is just going to be mirrored. So a mirror copy. and then we'll adjust the overall size as is necessary. So the size of the width of the window that we want is 850. So we'll draw that in, 850. And we measure that width, I have to do this zoomed in to get this correct, from the outside of the frame to the outside of the frame. Then we need an extra 10 mil tolerance on either side. So the frame, let's say this a different way. So the stud spacing, the opening of the stud needs to be 870. So we have an additional 10 mil on both sides. So when I go to place this into the wall, I'm going to need to adjust these studs in order to be able to do that. The next question is, I need 2 of these windows. How am I going to position those in this wall? So are they hard up against the edge? Are they sort of semi-centered? Generally speaking, it's a question of how do we want it to be viewed from the inside? How do we want it to be viewed from the outside? Outside is the most commonly way we'd understand that. And so I could resize or create a centering based on figuring out how large that should be. So if I was to get a line here, I'm just using lines here just to make it really simple. I could change it if I needed to clarify that. So we've got the overall length being 4,600, 4600, and we've got the window being, so I'll go divided by 850, and so we can see that that would give us about 5.4 spacing. So if we were trying to evenly space it, we've got about 5 and a bit divisions. So if I select this wall and then say divided by, or divisions, and I'll just change this to 5 for a second, we can see if we were to divide it up here, so 1, 2, 3, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've divided this wall up into 5 even spaces. If I was to move this to here, we can see this is slightly smaller. So I'm probably going to be okay with it being slightly smaller. The next question is, how does this relate to our plywood? And so we can see that that's 1 sheet of plywood. So either way, it's not going to be very practical because we're going to be cutting sheets of plywood. So I'm not really concerned either way with how we do this. If I was to move this back slightly, we see that's 50 mil. So if I center that, that's going to be 25. So if I go 25, 25, do the same thing over here, move, drag a copy, move this over here. That's now giving us a pretty clear, realistic representation of how to create 2 windows centered in this wall. And I'm not needing to use a lot of maths, of course. I'm just using ArchiCAD's ability to do equal spacing. Now, I can move these into position based on that. So let's move this back and move this back. That's now representing my window. And of course I want this glass not to be 2 pieces, but 1 piece. So I'll just extend that to be full length, and then I'll get rid of the one that I don't want. And that's now finished. So I can group that all together. That's my window. That's where it sits. Let's move it into place. And how do I want it to sit? I want the inside face to line up with the inside line of the plywood. And so we can see that works pretty well. It's slightly outside the cladding, which is a pretty good result. We can see that this is almost perfect, in fact, of where that needs to sit. So this stud can basically stay. I'm just going to move it 1 millimeter, select, adjust, move to that point there. The plywood lining, again, will stop in line with the stud. I'll then move, this one has to stay where it is, but I'll move this stud out so it's aligning with that. Split the plywood, delete that bit of ply, delete that bit of ply. Now the ply will exist below, but in terms of a floor plan where we're cutting through the window, that's representing how it should. And again, this stud will exist above and below the window, but for now we'll just delete it to try to make sense of what we're doing. So now we've got our window represented, and we're just going to copy this across. So select that whole window, make sure grouping is enabled, drag a copy, align with the other one that I did. We can see that this works slightly differently just because the way that we created the studs was different last time. So in order to do this properly, what do I need to do? I need to keep this stud where it is. I need to move this one across. So we can see that works pretty well. There's a slight gap there. So I'll just move that across a millimeter, less than a millimeter, so that's really fine. And that means we've now got a double stud. We'll do the same thing over here. Move, drag, align. And I can't move this one, so I need to double stud this. And I'll do the same over here. Double stud these. Double stud. I'll trim that ply back to the stud. And back to this stud. So now we've placed both of our windows in plan. Now we're going to need to look at some more detailing and get this detailing correct for the head and the sill as well, but at the moment we've done the jam studs. And so we've adjusted this left wall based on the double door, and we've adjusted this bottom wall, we call it south, our south wall, based on 2 windows. And we've tried to create those window positions in order to make it centered with the outside of the wall, meaning that it's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 even bays. So it looks symmetrical, it looks consistent. We don't need to worry about the actual length of the weatherboard outside because they're all going to be cut to length. We were trying to be practical with the way that the ply worked, but unfortunately we couldn't do that perfectly because of the size. But we've done a pretty good job of making that work fairly well. Now, if I wanted to adjust this at all, I'd be saying, well, could I get away with having a full 1200 sheet of ply? We'd see that if I move that to be a full 1200 sheet of ply, these windows would end up be bashing against each other in the middle. And so it wouldn't give us a very desirable outcome anyway. So unfortunately, there is a bit of wastage, but that's about as good as we can do. And of course, we were trying to be as consistent as we could possibly in the other walls where we're not creating wastage. I can delete all these extra lines now that we've done that. And our plan is taking shape. Now this has taken a bit of work, and again, this is way more detail than we'd normally ever need to do from an architectural point of view. What I'm really trying to explain at the moment is the construction methodology so that we understand the intricate detailing of how this would be built, and therefore when we're drawing it, exactly what we're drawing and who we're drawing for. In this case, we're really drawing for the carpenter, or basically explaining how the carpenter would be creating this timber frames building.